Good evening. I would like to call the meeting of the Curriculum and Student Success Committee of the Portland Board of Public Education to order at 7:30 on the 7:36, apologies, on March 9th, 2026. I'm Julianne Opperman, Chair of the committee and District 3 Representative, and we already have Vice Chair Mickey Bondo, Committee Member Myelina, and I expect at some point Committee Member Usar Ali will be with us. Tonight, we're going to have a presentation on the grading system across the district, put together by Ms. Haley Didrikson, Senior Director of Data and Technology. And we have other members of the staff that will be joining us, and as they come on, we will introduce them. But before we begin, is there anyone who wishes to make public comment? Please raise your hand if you do. I'm not seeing anyone in the attendees raising their hand yet. Give it another few moments. Okay, I am going to close public comments and we may begin our agenda. So I think Ms. Didrikson, it's your responsibility to put up the slides and let's go for it.
All right, let me hit my screen. Let me see. I know Ryan just made me the host and it's saying I cannot. Oh, there we go. All right, I got to override the screen share. There we go. All right. Hopefully that is rendering for folks okay on your end. Awesome. Perfect. All right. So the first item on our agenda this evening is a recap on the grading task force update that we have provided at the end of last year and sort of some next steps with that work. And so to dig in here, so some of this is just sort of summarizing what we had already shared previously, but really, I think the recommendation that kind of came out of a dialogue that this group had several months ago is just that the process of bringing online our PowerSchool data dashboards has obviously moved us closer to building a data infrastructure that enables folks to have real-time access to data, which is really exciting. But it has also, in the process, revealed opportunities for improving our data quality and really shed light on the variability in our data practices across the district. And so in particular, when we look at our academic data, our secondary schools, when they go into our dashboards, they see that they're pretty messy and difficult to use. And this is largely driven not by sort of anything that's wrong with the boards, but really the underlying data itself. And especially because of the sort of structure of the grading systems across our schools. So while our elementary schools have sort of a standard grading practice across them, our secondary schools, we have a lot of variability, and it varies not only in terms of the scales that we're seeing folks using, whether it's a 0 to 100 scale versus a 1 to 4 proficiency scale, but it also shows up, for example, in the cadence on which our secondary schools are assigning credit for classes. And so when you're trying to look at data in real time, it can make it really difficult to have a comparison across buildings. And so at the end of the day, these inconsistencies have some impacts on our ability to use data, but also our ability to serve students. So I think from a data perspective, it ultimately leads to ineffective data because we can't reliably sort of set or monitor district academic goals based on gradebook data. It just makes it impossible to set sort of district level goals. So while individual schools can and are setting their own goals. From a district lens, we're really limited in that way. The other sort of impact is just a lack of shared norms. And so I think this raises questions, of course, when we operationalize these grades and talk about what they actually mean. When we don't have a standard sort of policy, it makes it hard to define. When we say mastery or proficiency, what does that actually mean in different buildings? And is that the same in each building, as you would hope it would be for students across a district? But the consequence of all of this, of course, then is that unfortunately it leads to potential inequity. And we're seeing this in particular when we look at what the cut score for passing is. And we have one high school where the sort of cut point in our grading scale is higher to pass than the other two high schools. And so that means that in theory, it's harder to pass a class at one school than others. And so if you think about, we would ideally have students have equitable opportunities across our buildings. And so that sort of difference, right, in operationalizing the grading system can have unintended consequences for perpetuating inequity. And then operationally, it's just really inefficient to have a system that is so varied, and it takes a lot of time to maintain a system where we have to do a lot of manual data manipulation because there's so much variation. And of course, then it has sort of long-term impacted the rollout of our PowerSchool dashboard, as we've had to do a lot of manual manipulation to even get the data to render correctly. So this group, has talked about, okay, so a next step that is logically coming out of our lessons learned in this data investigation is to establish a task force that will dig more deeply into our secondary grading policy. And so the proposed sort of time frame is really to use the remainder of the school year, so starting this month, to identify a diverse and representative group of individuals from our schools, from our community, to participate in this task force to kind of dig into this dilemma that the data team has unearthed, but we don't own, right? We collectively own this, and how do we sort of investigate it in a thoughtful and systematic way? Then once the group has been identified, the goal is to have between 6 and 8 meetings over the coming months with a really discrete set of tasks at hand. Because I know, having been involved in different groups, right, it can be easy to have a scope that that grows and grows. And so really trying to be deliberate about what is the charge of this group. So the 4 core objectives for this group would be to define the problem clearly by documenting the variation in grading practices across our buildings and make these differences transparent. And the data team has started this work, but actually bringing a group together who have a varied set of perspectives to really codify what is the challenge and the variation. The second charge would be to try to understand what are our current practices and their rationale, right? There's a reason that things are the way they are. And so really trying to understand the why and the philosophy that has driven these different decision points, and trying to synthesize that in a single coherent resource so that this committee can really review that with a full comprehensive view. The third charge would also be to think about what is the existing research on equitable and standards-based grading practices, just so that we can be putting Portland's work in context, and making sure that we are aligning our vision to research. And then lastly, the sort of culminating task would be to develop a recommendation and a draft district-wide grading policy for implementation in theory in 27-28. So the idea is that at the end of this year, the group would put forward sort of a recommended draft policy that would give us a full year to really plan out what it would mean to implement a common grading policy across our secondary schools. And that is it.
Thank you very much. And we have questions already. And I'll begin with you, Member Yusra.
Thank you. My first question was, so in our practice, did the grading hurt some students at some school, like GPA wise, compared to another school? And my second question is, how will this new grading like rubric account for different what is the word? Different rigor of the curriculum at each school?
Two very good questions. So in terms of impact, we haven't done an impact analysis in terms of the GPA. We have created like a normalized GPA conversion in PowerSchool so that we can have apples to apples comparison on the GPA. There's a lot of manipulation happening behind the scenes to happen where we see less so in GPA, but anecdotally, we've heard there have been issues when students have transferred from one building to another building in high school where they may have been passing the class in one building and then they move to a school where the standard for passing is different and then they're no longer passing that class and vice versa. So I'm not sure exactly how that would impact the GPA, but I would imagine that if you're passing in one place and not passing in the other, then that could sort of change the trajectory of your graduation. And then, sorry, the second question, I'm like trying to hold it in. Could you repeat your second question?
Yes, of course. My second one was how will the new grading rubric basically account for the different rigor at different schools?
Yes. So that I think would be a charge of the task force, in my opinion, right? That would be a really appropriate conversation for that group to have, because I think when we see what is the current practice and like really have, I'm imagining a chart, right, where we do a comparison across our buildings so that we can look at how is one school doing it, how's another school doing it, and maybe even thinking about how do they define rigor. I think that could be a really interesting area of investigation.
That's sufficient, you, sir?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Maya, would you?
Yes, I have a few questions. Just clarifying a couple of things, Haley. So when you said the different schools have a different cadence, do you mean like some are on trimesters and some are semesters? So like the reporting is at different times of year. Is that what you meant?
No,
Oh, okay.
that is a really good question. I should have been more clear. So we have one building that assigns, and I'm just talking about the high schools in this context. One high school assigns credit once a year at the end of the year.
Okay.
One high school assigns credit twice a year at the semester end and at the end of the year. And then one high school assigns credit on a quarterly basis. So when this has been particularly noticeable when we're trying to talk about ninth grade on track monitoring, and that our ability to say that a student is on track is hard to do across our buildings because the rate at which students are accumulating credit is different. And so it just makes it hard to operationalize it. But it also means, again, if a student moves between buildings, they may have gotten credit in one building and then they move to the other building and they're going halfway into a class. So it does create problems for sort of transfer credits across buildings. And I think my understanding from talking to folks in schools is they've found workarounds. It's not as if people have just let this problem exist and done nothing about it, but wouldn't it be nice, right, if there didn't have to be workarounds?
Great. That's helpful. And then are we just talking about high schools or are we talking about middle schools as well? Like, do the different middle schools have different grading systems as well?
So the middle schools are more aligned in their practices, but my conversations with folks have indicated that the middle schools would be interested in sort of being part of a dialogue about aligning our grading practices. So while the middle schools have a common grading scale, there is a bigger question, right, about are they aligned in terms of how they think about grading? And so I think that certainly the high schools are a really important area to focus this attention, but I think it would be worth including the middle schools as part of the dialogue, also to think about, building a vertically aligned system.
Okay, great. Okay, another question I have is with this task force, will you be looking at the differences in curriculum from school to school and like whether the schools follow the EL curriculum or a more general one? And then does that have an effect on the grading practice?
That is a really good question. I feel like that would have to be sort of a background consideration. I mean, right, there is of course this Pandora's box where we could be opening up a lot of things worth investigating. And so part of my hope is that if we set a really specific scope for this group to stay focused on, those 4 core tasks, that will help ensure that the work can be actually accomplished in the time frame we're setting out. But it does feel like curriculum would have to be, when we're pressure testing a potential policy, to say, okay, if this policy were to be implemented, what would it look like in an EL school? And maybe that's the way to come at it, is sort of what's our dream for a grading policy, and then what would it mean to actually implement it?
And
I have
and I'll
one.
just, can I add to that answer? It really is also, when we're talking about grading and assessment, we're really talking about what is the standard criteria for mastery of a particular content, class, unit. Um, it's also important to note, as Haley said before, that we are also looking at course configuration, and so, for me to take, and I'll just name a course, English 1, in one high school versus another, there should not be um, I should have the a same similar experience, and A in one should also represent an A in another, B like that, or whatever the grading configuration is that is agreed upon. So it wouldn't be heavily about the actual instructional materials, but also about the course, the criteria for the course, the assessments, and the standards for mastery.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, one last question. I think I asked this question a few meetings ago, and it's just something that always bugged me when I was a teacher using Power School, working in a standards-based grading school, is just how you have to manipulate the grade to input it into Power School. So I just wanted to know what the practice is if you're in a school that does standards-based grading, when you're going in to put the grade into Power School. Can you put in a 1, 2, 3, or 4 and that's it? Or you have to put in like an 85 for a 3 and because that's what we had to do. This was years ago, but just making sure that that's something that is possible.
Yeah, the system is, we're able to set up on the back end a set of crosswalks. So we can say that, a 1 in one school is equivalent to, a F in another school. Like that's totally feasible. So that part is actually pretty straightforward. It's then when you try to use the data on the
Yeah.
other side, when it doesn't all match up, that it is harder. But yes, from a teacher's perspective, my understanding is it's pretty straightforward. And there are tools we leverage. Google Classroom, there's like a much slicker data entry tool that exists for teachers that want to do it that way. And I know it's very popular among our high schools. So we certainly have, I think, figured out the mechanics of the inputting. It's really just about aligning the back end data.
Because I feel like on a practice standpoint, like 100 is not necessarily a 4, right? And so sometimes I think that gets confusing when students are looking at their scores or the parents are looking at it and saying, oh, my student got 100 on all of their assignments, but they have a 3. And then that can be confusing to everyone and I had this argument before with someone. So just making sure there's a way to really like clarify that, if that makes sense what I'm getting at.
I can
Yeah,
say, I think when you start figuring the standards across all of them, it will be pretty straightforward. I think this committee may work things out, so it's easy for everybody, one hopes. Mickey, would you like to say something? Ask a question.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah. I have a couple of questions. So thank you, Ali, for the presentation. So for the selection of the team, I just want to understand the process of selecting the team. So it's going to be across different schools, or we going to any expertise uh, aligning to the research, to the study.
Yeah, so it will be a collaborative effort among the academics team leaders. So it's not me going and cherry picking. And then I think the other group, that we will lean into is our principals and assistant principals who are sort of knowledgeable about their own buildings and who might be knowledgeable. From conversations I've had, individual school buildings have had grading conversations within their own buildings before. So they actually may have some folks who consider themselves grading experts in their building. So I think that's where sort of the lived experience of the leaders in the buildings will be really helpful for driving identification of folks. And then the other thing is just thinking about, potentially putting out a more public call to see if there's interest from individuals who might not necessarily get identified by their building leaders for participation. So we're gonna. I don't know how much interest there will be, right? I guess we'll find out. But I think we will try to be really strategic about making sure that there's representation across roles, and then bringing in folks who may have some of the sort of more evidence-based expertise. So, but also balancing with lived experience, right? Like a teacher brings a really important perspective, and so making sure we have multiple teachers who can share their insights about living their school's grading systems.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. My second question is about the way we want to do a grading standard. I mean, like a uniform scale. So are we going to handle the historical data, the one already passed? Are we going to recalculate the past, or we just going to say, okay, we have a discontinuity of our long time data trends. So are we going to move forward? Yeah.
I love that question. So I think we would have a couple choices. We will run into the issue of that it may not be directly comparable, and so any trend lines that we're looking at might come with an asterisk. But I do think if we can sort of agree to a common scale, there is a conversion that can be done. So if we want to sort of retro map our data. So if we say this is the scale we've adopted, we could look at historic data and essentially say, okay, looking at the historic data in this context, this is
Right.
equivalent to the new grade. So that is something we could correct for on the data side. I mean, it would be a project for the data team to work through, and we might have to do it sort of year by year and chunk backwards. But I think it would be worth it. I think we're just trying to look forward to see, can we even pull this off? But I love that question because it speaks to the data nerd in me.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Right. So my other question is that are we going to standardize the grading policy or the grading system for our vulnerable student? I saw Jess on the call. So I just wonder, for a student with IPs, multilingual, so are we going to make sure that we are normalizing, or we are punishing the standard skill? Because I know the way they're grading the IPs or the multilingual learners, he just from the growth. So I'm just wonder are we going to normalize it? Yes.
I might see if Jesse wants to weigh in on this, because like my understanding is, a grading scale is a grading scale, and then it's about supporting students to sort of reach the expected grading scale. But Jesse or Cheryl, I don't know if you want to chime in sort of philosophically about how we would approach that.
Yeah, I'll let Jesse chime in, but I'll just add that, when we think about our students with disabilities, or our ESOL students, it really is about what it is in terms of their, specifically special ed students, their IEP says is the program for them. In addition to speaking about placement, if a student is placed in a general education classroom, for any of their study, then it is about them meeting the standards, the mastery for that course or class. And then again, as Haley said really well, providing the accommodations necessary to support the student in meeting the expectation. By no means do we want to dummy down or over modify curriculum, because then it is, creating an inequity in that the students are not getting access to the same high quality coursework and education that that their non-special ed or their non ESOL students would be experiencing. Jesse?
Oh,
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Cheryl. The only thing I would add is that, IEP teams will definitely look at both, they will certainly look at students' grades and performance in class as one data point. They'll also look at, IEP goals and progress in specific targeted areas in those goals. But because of that, when we're thinking about, particularly when Cheryl spoke to like what placement is appropriate for a student, it's important that for that reason, as well as all the others that were listed, that we're sort of seeing how they are performing in that setting. So we're looking to accommodate and support where it's warranted by the IEP team, but we're not looking to have a different approach to grading.
okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah. So my last question is that the way I look at the way you present, honey, and the way I knew I've been always advocating to get a better data system. So I'm just wonder, because I see it's so ineffective data system than we have now. So can we afford to wait until 2027, or we can have a quick wins so we can implement that one to the 26, 27? Because the way I read your memo is that is a must. So I'm just wondering about the year because so what are we doing now? So I just want to see what the quick win we can go with that. I know I'm pushing a little further, a little fast, but that is so it was so in it just so it was been there for years. So I'm gonna just keep doubting the information bringing in front of us if I see coming from your memo and I be a data person. Nerd is just something I'm gonna keep asking myself, okay, as really current effective data, then we bring in here when I see the way the system has been built for years and the way we don't have any standards grading system. And then, so I try to see, I know then we're going to grade the team. So how fast, as sooner you see yourself going to reflect that is something then magical. I know it's just, I'm hoping. What do you see that? Can we afford it?
Well, I'll ask Haley and Dr. Ahmed to chime in a bit, but I want to say that there's such an urgency, and I hear the urgency in your voice as well. It's really interesting as we continue to work together and improve upon our system. We discover things like this. Haley and I had multiple conversations and I myself had many questions about the practice, and it takes from now with board direction to move forward with the grading task force till the end of the year to kind of get our schools and our teams and our members to configure what the new grading practice needs to be for children. And then we need time to socialize it and get the word out so that by the time school starts in August, everyone is ready to go, having the same understanding, having the understanding of the rationale and the why, and having a clear plan of what this implementation will look like. So there's a space in between where we have to do a little bit of work and
Right.
get a little groundwork going so that we are ready for this year. When I say this year, August of 26, right, Haley? That's what we're looking at?
So the proposed timeline does sort of give us a year to focus on the implementation. And so here's my thinking. So in a past life, I did more work around grading policies with other school districts. And what I learned through that process is that the implementation, right, technically speaking, it could be pretty straightforward, right? We change the grading scales in Infinite Campus. Everyone logs into Infinite Campus. They see
Right.
they can only enter those grades. But grading is more than just like a set of numbers or letters that you're inputting into a system. It's a philosophy about what we value in education. And so I do think, at least my perception in my short time with Portland Public Schools, is that grading is something that people have talked and thought a lot about. And so I think to try to do something really quickly could be a little bumpy. Like I would love to say let's do it next year, but I do worry about just the adaptive elements of rolling out a new policy, especially because I think Maya raised some important questions about, like, as a teacher, like what would this mean for me to input this into a
Right.
grade book? And so I think there would need to be a fair amount of training and support and
Okay.
socializing to get us where we need to go. So again, I hear you on the speed, and I also I would be reticent to move at that pace.
Perfect.
And
And I just want to add something about the family communication, because we know, I had the kids I'm sorry, Dr. Ahmed, you just want to add something before I go with my last one?
Just as Haley started, and good evening, everyone. As Haley started in her presentation or part of the presentation, she mentioned about it makes sense at the school level, and the challenge is when it comes as a system level. So that is, one of the implications that it will have if we do it like uh, next year, for example, and this is coming from the building level. By October, November, the guidance counselors need to send the colleges what it means, the translation of the grading system to the colleges. Oh, A means this, B means this, or 95 means this. And the colleges actually ask sometimes updates. Are they before they accept the students? So that's one of the things. As swift as we would like to do some is like internalization of for the team, collaboration and teacher participation in the process, and looking into the assets and what we have already. Because really, as Maya was mentioning, like it is not only 4 to 100 or 0 to 100 and 1 to 4, but also it is letter grades as well. And also there are some weighted grades that Yusra was mentioned about. AP class means like weighted 104 or 106. Honors class is one of this. So there is really a lot of layers into this, and it makes sense in the school level because they calibrated and worked on it. And also another thing, also like what courses are given in one school and another school. So, and even the courses are sometimes translated. Like if we took psychology in one class and sociology in another class, another school. So that's why the building level we decided that no one changes school during the school year. Only
Okay.
the summer you can do it because semester and quarter and year long. So there's money implications. So I see the idea of the year long that Haley is presenting, and more collaboration and participation. And when we start to be ready, will be a good idea.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ahmed. So my last recommendation, just the way Dr. Proctor, you mentioned about communication. I think families, they really need to have better strategy how we communicate, because most of the parents, it's going to be a big jump. Like, my colleague Maya just mentioned about, you jump from a 90% to, equivalent to 3. So it's something then, somebody like me who used to be familiar with the traditional grading. So I think a better strategy to communicate to those parents while we're changing it is really necessary. So our communication strategy should be really well defined, how much we're going to explain parents. So thank you so much. Thank you, Chair. I'm done.
Certainly. I just want to step in. I think the numbering and all is important to get the data to work. But I think the underlying factor is to make sure that the rigor is the same, and what we say, it happens in one school that someone is learning French in one school, it means there's learning French in the other school. And I know in a conversation with some friends who work with parents outside of the school, that some, particularly with multilingual, that the teacher will say they're doing fine, and then they aren't, it doesn't mean anything. They're doing fine maybe because they smile, but they're not, do they know the content? So I think that to me, Haley, is really, really critical in your group, to say what are we trying to teach, and what are the, as you said, the philosophy part of it, the standards, the values. However you put numbers on it is one thing. But anyway, thank you for being patient. Maya, did you want to say something? You'll have to speak though.
Yeah, sorry. I was just wondering what you need from us as both a committee and a board. I was just kind of looking quickly. I didn't see a policy that exists about grading. And so are you looking for us to create a policy? Okay, so that's something also that will take some time, probably in the next school year. Um, okay, that was my question. You were both nodding. Thank you.
But I guess the other question is for this committee, because that's moving on to the policy. Do we, you have your group going, do you need anything more from us as far as saying, go do and do the wonderful things that you're going to do? Anything official, or are you ready just to do it? Well,
I think we're ready to just move forward, right, Haley? I think once we start the process as we make discovery and start to come to recommendations, then we would come back and give an update to this committee. And then this committee will then give direction or take it over somehow, transfer over to the policy committee for consideration. Um,
and Maya's chair of the policy committee, so it'll be pretty easy to.
Yay, there you go. Very good.
Are there any other comments from anyone or questions? I mean, considering how late we stayed the last time, we are not going to stay as late this evening, and I appreciate that. Any questions on anything at this point? Well, then I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn. And second, and all in favor? Yeah. Wow, what time is it? We are adjourned at 8:13. Have a wonderful evening. Have a good tomorrow. Adios.